She predicted her own death and left clues that surprised everyone. Today, we delve into another chilling case. Charlene Wangandi had an eerie premonition of her demise, leaving behind clues. Often, criminal investigations drag on for years without yielding conclusive results. Modern advancements like DNA testing have cracked some cold cases once deemed unsolvable, but not all. Despite the clarity of some cases, conflicting evidence, witness statements, and expert analyses can muddle the truth, leaving no definitive verdict. Such was the case for Charlene Wangandi. There was a clear motive, a prime suspect, and even Charlene herself sensed impending danger, hinting at it to her daughters in hopes they would unravel the mystery. Even after the suspect's arrest, trial, and initial conviction, the case saw numerous reviews, with outcomes ranging from life imprisonment to complete acquittal. Nearly 25 years have passed since her untimely death, and although the prime suspect has been free for years, Charlene's daughters persist in their quest for the truth. Charlene Elena Wangandi, born on November 14, 1948, in Grand Junction, Colorado, was noted for her striking beauty from a young age, a trait that didn't go unnoticed. Known as the school's belle, she frequently participated in contests and at 20, clinched her city's beauty queen title. Her allure won her many suitors, and in 1970, at the age of 22, she married. By 1971, she and her husband welcomed their first daughter, Tammy, and 3 years later, their second daughter, Tiffany. In the mid-70s, the family relocated to Denver for her husband's promising job opportunity. Earning well, he supported Charlene and their daughters, enabling her to dedicate herself to homemaking and parenting, striving to be both mother and friend. Approaching her 30s, however, Charlene began displaying signs of mental distress, with mood swings that strained her marriage and affected her children. At times, she was unable to care for herself, forcing Tammy to mature swiftly and assume responsibility for her sister's well-being and safety. Seeing the seriousness of Charlene's condition, her husband repeatedly urged her to seek professional help. However, these discussions often escalated into heated arguments. Charlene adamantly refused to acknowledge her mental and emotional struggles, and over time, her condition worsened. In 1985, her husband, no longer able to cope with her manic depressive episodes, filed for divorce. During the difficult proceedings, 14-year-old Tammy expressed a desire to live with her father, while 10-year-old Tiffany chose to stay with their mother. The sisters were separated for several years until their father eventually gained full custody of both through the courts. Despite living with their father, the girls maintained phone contact with their mother and visited her during holidays, even after she entered a new relationship. In 1989, Charlene excitedly called Tammy to share the news that she had found true love and was planning to marry a man named Ken Wakisaka. Ken was fully aware of Charlene's mental health issues, but was willing to accept her as she was. Later that year, they married. Ken owned a home in California, where they lived for about a year after their wedding. Charlene, however, had long dreamed of moving to Hawaii. In pursuit of her dream, Ken secured a job there and rented a spacious apartment in a scenic Honolulu townhouse. They moved to Hawaii in the early 90s and soon invited Charlene's daughters to visit. Tammy and Tiffany happily accepted, eager to see their mother's new life. The girls instantly liked their mother's new husband, Ken. He seemed serious, thoughtful, and genuinely caring. Charlene, in turn, appeared content and calm with him by her side. Their marriage lasted nearly a decade and seemed strong and happy. During this time, Tammy and Tiffany grew up, started their own families, and moved to different states. Tammy lived with her husband and children in California, while Tiffany, after completing her university studies, accepted a great job offer and settled in Arizona. Despite the distance, they remained in regular contact with their mother and visited her in Hawaii. However, by 1998, trouble loomed in Charlene's marriage. During a phone conversation with Tammy, Charlene revealed that she and Ken had been arguing constantly and were on the brink of divorce. In subsequent calls, Charlene often sounded distressed, and her daughters could tell she had been crying. Concerned, they reached out to Ken to understand the situation, but he always reassured them that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. In the fall of 1999, Tammy and Tiffany flew to Honolulu to visit their mother. They stayed at Charlene and Ken's townhouse, and during their stay, noticed nothing unusual or troubling in their relationship. However, just before they left, Charlene made an odd request. She asked her daughters to promise that if anything ever happened to her, they would conduct their own investigation to uncover the truth. Perplexed by their mother's words, the daughters asked her what she meant, and if someone had threatened her. But Charlene responded vaguely, offering no concrete explanation, and simply urged them to keep the promise. A month later, Charlene informed her daughters that she and Ken had separated. She had moved back to their home in California to finalize the divorce. The daughters accepted this news without alarm, thinking it was inevitable. They believed their mother would finally find some peace. Tammy, living nearby, invited Charlene to stay with her for a while to relax, change her surroundings, and spend time with her grandchildren. Charlene enjoyed the time with her family and even remarked that she hadn't felt so happy in years. But soon, Charlene unexpectedly decided to return home, claiming urgent matters required her attention, and she fell out of contact for nearly a week. When Tammy and Tiffany eventually managed to reach their mother, Charlene dropped another surprise. She had returned to Hawaii, decided not to go through with the divorce, and was living with Ken again. While this sudden change of heart raised some concerns, the sisters weren't entirely shocked, as their mother's behavior had always been somewhat unpredictable. But soon, Charlene's actions became more unusual. She would call one of her daughters to share updates about her day, and then call back just hours later, repeating the same story, completely unaware that she had already shared it. Tammy and Tiffany chalked this up to their mother's mental health issues, assuming she was simply mixing up which daughter she had already called. Over time, the daughters began to occasionally ignore their mother's calls, thinking they were just repeats of previous conversations, a decision they would come to deeply regret. On April 4th, 2000, Charlene called Tammy, but she missed the call. Charlene left a chilling message on the answering machine, telling her daughter that she loved them, loved her grandchildren, and that she had found peace through God. The message left on the answering machine alarmed Tammy, and she immediately called her mother back. This time, Ken answered the phone, sounding confused and concerned. He explained that something strange was happening with Charlene, and he wasn't sure what to do. Desperate, Tammy asked to speak to her mother, and when she heard Charlene's voice, a wave of fear washed over her. Charlene's speech was slow and slurred, as if she were struggling to form each word. She told Tammy once more that she loved her, but beyond that, her words were barely intelligible. Alarmed by the state her mother was in, Tammy promptly called emergency services and requested immediate medical attention be sent to Charlene's house. Meanwhile, Tiffany managed to get in touch with their mother as well and stayed on the phone with her until the ambulance arrived. Hearing the sirens in the background, Tiffany felt a sense of relief, believing that her mother would soon receive the help she needed. The sisters asked Ken to keep them updated on the situation as the medics evaluated Charlene. Once the paramedics arrived, they examined Charlene but were left puzzled. While she was conscious and seemingly calm, her sluggish speech and lack of emotional response concerned them. Ken speculated that Charlene might have taken some medication and washed it down with alcohol, which could explain her condition. However, the medics dismissed this theory. They couldn't smell any alcohol, nor did they find any bottles or medication containers lying around. When asked to show where the medications were kept, Ken led the paramedics to the bathroom cabinet. Inside, they found no potent drugs or psychotropic substances, and none of the containers appeared empty. Ken confirmed that nothing was missing, and the medics recorded the names and quantities of the medicines on hand. Based on this, they concluded that Charlene wasn't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Surprisingly, Charlene was not taken to the hospital. Ken insisted that since there was no immediate threat to her life, they could handle the situation themselves. Reluctantly, the medics agreed and left. Later that afternoon, Charlene called Tiffany again, but the conversation was brief. Her speech remained slurred, and every word seemed to be a struggle. By the night of April 5th, Tiffany's concern had reached a boiling point. Frustrated by the lack of answers, she called an ambulance once more, demanding that they return to her mother's house and figure out what was truly going on. This time, she insisted they take Charlene to the hospital. Charlene was taken to the hospital unconscious and rushed directly to intensive care. Within hours, Her condition worsened. She slipped into a deep coma and was placed on life support. Around noon, Ken called Tammy, informing her that their mother was teetering between life and death. Tammy immediately contacted Tiffany, and together they booked the earliest flight to Honolulu, desperate to be by their mother's side and to understand what had happened. The only thing they knew for certain was that Charlene's life was hanging by a thread. Still at the airport, Tiffany called the police, briefly explaining the situation and voicing her suspicions. She believed Ken might have played a role in her mother's hospitalization. Although she had no concrete evidence, she remembered the promise she had made to her mother and was determined to investigate the matter herself. A clue in the envelope. As soon as the sisters landed in Hawaii, they immediately contacted the hospital for an update on their mother's condition. The doctor informed them that Charlene remained in a coma, still on life support. Surprisingly, Ken had already left the hospital to go home and rest. His behavior stunned the sisters. Why would he leave Charlene's side in such a critical moment? From the airport, Tammy and Tiffany went straight to the hospital. By the time they arrived, Ken had returned, looking distraught and overwhelmed. He expressed his intention to stay with Charlene, while the exhausted sisters, worn out from the long flight and lack of sleep, decided to head to their mother's home to rest and change. They declined to stay at a hotel, opting instead to stay at their mother's house with Ken. Before the sisters left, Ken handed them a sealed envelope labeled childhood photos, saying that Charlene had wanted them to have these. The sisters, however, had other plans. They hadn't refused the hotel simply for comfort. They wanted to investigate the house and surrounding area without Ken's presence, hoping to find any clues that might explain their mother's condition. Upon arriving at the townhouse, they conducted a thorough search of the house but found nothing suspicious, assuming Ken had already cleaned up. However, outside in the garden, they discovered an empty pill bottle in one of the flower beds, seemingly placed there recently. This discovery triggered Tammy's memory. She recalled a phone conversation with her mother, where Charlene had mentioned childhood photos and hinted that they would find answers there. At the time, Tammy had dismissed her mother's words as incoherent, but now it all clicked. She retrieved the envelope Ken had given them earlier. To their surprise, the envelope did not contain any childhood pictures. Instead, it held pages from Ken's personal diary. As they skimmed the pages, they discovered shocking revelations. Ken had been attending anger management courses. In his own words, he detailed moments where he had hurt and humiliated Charlene, exposing the darker side of their relationship. In Ken's diary, he described calling Charlene names, yelling at her, and even spitting on her, though there was no mention of physical violence. It seemed that Ken had emotionally abused Charlene to the point where her fragile mental state may have led her to take her own life. These diary entries were crucial pieces of evidence, as they were in Ken's own handwriting, directly implicating him in her emotional decline. The sisters now realized that their mother hadn't been exaggerating when she warned that something might happen to her, and Ken was clearly the prime suspect. As they continued their search for more clues, a police officer visited the hospital to question Ken. By then, it had already been determined that Charlene had taken a large dose of medication, causing her to fall into a coma due to the lack of immediate medical attention. Though the sisters suspected Ken might be responsible, they knew they couldn't directly accuse him without solid proof. When questioned, Ken remained calm, claiming he had no idea when or how Charlene could have taken the pills. He was quick to emphasize that he hadn't touched or strangled her, a strange and unnecessary clarification, but one that went unnoticed by investigators at the time, as no signs of physical violence were found on Charlene's body. A curious detail emerged. Ken had a criminal record for assault and battery, predating his relationship with Charlene. He had kept this part of his past hidden from her. After this revelation, the detective working on the case contacted Tammy, and together, they devised a plan to get Ken to reveal more. They decided to record a phone conversation and ask him direct questions about the events leading up to Charlene's collapse. During the call, Ken spoke about how much he loved and missed Charlene. He claimed that on April 4th, she must have taken the pills and begun saying her goodbyes, though he didn't immediately grasp what was happening. Ken even claimed that Charlene had asked him to strangle her to help end her life, but he didn't comply. When asked why he hadn't called 911 immediately, Ken said he hadn't taken her words seriously, assuming she was just in a depressed state. As the conversation progressed, Ken began to show signs of paranoia. He suddenly became suspicious, accusing the sisters of trying to set him up and send him to jail. His demeanor shifted, and he began shouting, repeatedly insisting that he hadn't beaten or strangled Charlene. He mentioned strangling her 3 separate times during the call, a point that did not go unnoticed by the sisters. The next day, while Tammy and Tiffany flew to California to gather more evidence at their mother's home, something shocking happened. Without informing the sisters or obtaining their consent, Ken allowed Charlene to be taken off life support. This decision left them devastated. Even more unsettling was the speech Ken gave at Charlene's funeral, which sounded less like a tribute and more like a legal defense of his innocence. Ken's repeated mentions of strangulation during the investigation raised red flags. After Charlene's death, additional tests were ordered, which revealed significant findings. Charlene had suffered brain damage, possibly caused by strangulation, and faint compression marks were discovered on her neck. It appeared that the perpetrator had gone to great lengths to avoid leaving obvious signs of harm. The sisters provided the police with the incriminating pages from Ken's diaries, the ones their mother had given them in the sealed envelope. Combined with the recorded phone call and the autopsy results, this amounted to substantial evidence, leading to Ken's arrest on charges of intentional deprivation of life. Further investigation uncovered another key detail. Shortly before Charlene's death, Ken had taken out a $150,000 life insurance policy on her. This provided a strong financial motive for the crime. Ken Wakisaka's trial began in the spring of 2002, 2 years after Charlene's tragic death. The trial lasted only 2 weeks, during which the 46-year-old defendant was found guilty of second-degree deprivation of life and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, an unexpected turn. It seemed that justice had been served, and Charlene's family could finally find some peace. However, 2 years later, the case took an unexpected twist. In 2004, a renowned civil rights attorney named John Edmonds took an interest in Ken's case. Edmonds, intrigued by the ambiguous nature of the trial, believed there might be flaws in the process. His motivations were clear. If he could win an appeal in such a high-profile case, it would significantly boost his career and reputation. Edmonds meticulously reviewed the case, searching for inconsistencies or legal errors. He discovered that the prosecution had focused heavily on the fact that Ken chose not to testify during the trial, using this as an indication of guilt. However, the Fifth Amendment protects defendants from being forced to testify against themselves, and Edmonds used this as the basis for an appeal. When Tammy and Tiffany learned about the appeal, they were initially confident that the court would uphold the original verdict. They believed the overwhelming evidence against Ken would prevent any reversal. But they had underestimated the skill and experience of the new attorney. In 2004, the guilty verdict was overturned, and Ken was released on bail. However, this didn't mean he was acquitted. The legal proceedings were far from over. Soon after, a new witness came forward, a student who had rented a room from the couple. This witness had never been called during the original trial and promised to shed light on new details that could change the course of the case. The new witness agreed to testify, claiming that Charlene may have harmed herself. According to the witness, on the day of her collapse, Charlene had frequently spoken about death. He also stated that it was Charlene, not Ken, who refused hospitalization when the paramedics arrived the first time. Armed with this new testimony, John Edmonds returned to court and successfully had the charges of intentional deprivation of life dropped. However, Ken was not completely exonerated. When Tammy and Tiffany learned about the dropped charges, they immediately demanded the case be re-examined. Unfortunately, the original prosecutor had passed away, and his successor showed little urgency in resuming the case. This delay allowed Edmonds to consult a forensic expert, asking him to review Charlene's autopsy results once more. The expert came to an unexpected conclusion. He suggested that Charlene may not have been strangled at all. According to his analysis, the faint marks on her neck could have been caused by the tubes used during her time on life support. These tubes, inserted into her throat, could have left imprints that were mistakenly interpreted as strangulation marks after she was disconnected. The breathing difficulties Charlene experienced may have stemmed from complications related to the tubes, not from any act of violence. In 2010, the new prosecutor abandoned the original charge of intentional deprivation of life. Ken's case was reclassified as criminal negligence, leading to Charlene's death. However, Edmonds contested this version as well, and the case never went to trial. Nearly a quarter century has passed since Charlene's death, and despite Tammy and Tiffany's tireless efforts, no further charges have been brought against Ken. The skilled attorney they faced successfully thwarted all attempts to resume the legal process. Today, the sisters remain convinced of Ken's guilt and continue their personal investigation, hoping to one day uncover the full truth. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. There are more shocking stories coming your way.